Greetings, everyone. I'm Stefan, Chief Strategist of the Xuman Overmind, and according to some, the most evil creature in the galaxy. Although I would like to give pushback on that. Completely false rumors. But anyways, today we're going to be doing a quick recap of what happened during the Nemesis Cold War event, sponsored by Paradox. And in today's sponsored recap video, I'll be justifying all of our actions and explaining how none of them were war crimes or anything of that sort. We, the Xumans, are beings of the Shroud. We emerged from the Shroud due to the machinations of humans in the galaxy. Now, we can't put them entirely at fault. In fact, originally we don't even remember what happened to get us out of the Shroud, but being in physical form and having to deal with stuff like flesh and planets certainly did take a toll on our psyche, and, we were a little messed up for a while. Due to the expulsion from the Shroud, the Xumans had consolidated all of their minds into one hive network. Now, this hive network does allow us to communicate and be together, but it does pose some difficulties from time to time. As far as our planetary and empire development went, we try to go about it in the most efficient way possible. As a hive mind, we are far more advanced and intellectual than any other sort of government structure in the galaxy, and therefore we expanded aggressively and seized as much planets as possible. Multiplying our population multiplied our intellectual capacity, and ultimately ended up letting us be free of the bounds of flesh. Soon enough, we started discovering other species in the galaxy. We put our envoys to use to try to research what was going on with those other species. I mean, ultimately, in the Shroud, we were all great powers, great masses of energy floating about, but here in this physical realm, there's a lot of different things, and a lot of those things are out to get you. The first aliens that we encountered actually wanted just the same stuff as we did. A system with 3 whole planets that could really be useful to expanding the capacity of our species. Now, I would assume that they also wanted to expand the capacity of their species, but we of course needed it more, and so we seized it. Ultimately, we discovered that the newly found species wasn't all that bad. These guys were xenophiles, they were friendly, and ultimately, we decided to become friends with them rather than, keep competing for the same resources. Friendship protocols were the best decision, and keeping an eye on them was also part of the deal. The other aliens in our neighborhood were not quite as friendly. In fact, they aggressively responded to our signs of friendship and our gift baskets, and ended up killing one of our beloved scientists. Now, as a hive mind, we can forgive and we can forget. Even though they were aggressive towards us in the beginning, it didn't mean that we could not be friends with them at some point later down the line. Eventually, though, we did stumble upon aliens that were a bit more intellectual than those that we have discovered just as our neighbors. These aliens, the Imperial Chocolate Covenant, actually had a link to the Imperium and to the history of the galaxy. These guys actually had some knowledge of what happened to the Shroud, and potentially they could give us clues of how to get back home.
Bring it back to the individuals in your empire. Ensure that you have the credits, energy credits available. That is 50 energy credits per month, and we can discuss more about the Shroud.
Ultimately, this information didn't prove to be very useful, and we started to suspect things about them, but for the time being, we were still friends, and we were still very friendly with them, although they did not seem to really want closer relations with us in return. It hurt us a little bit, but ultimately, we want to be friends, and we can make friends eventually over time. The only intellectual aliens that we could not really befriend well was the Imperium, those that pulled us out of the Shroud in the first place. These guys seem to be relatively friendly. In fact, the ones that pulled us out of the Shroud were long dead, and the species as a whole has moved on significantly since that point. But we're not entirely on good terms with them. You know, we still wanted them to be friends with us, but of all the species in the galaxy, they were probably the least friendly out of all of them. Nonetheless, we kept developing our worlds and expanding further into our nearby territory. We decided that putting all of our resources into research was the way to go, and getting more technologies up and running would eventually help us breach the secrets of the Shroud and potentially let us get back home. We also discovered that building up our planets further could allow us to grow more population over time. In fact, getting a whole bunch of extra housing at our planets did help us out with growth, and the more the hive mind expanded, the more research we were able to get, and eventually we came to a point where we had more technology than the rest of the galaxy combined. We were able to use this technological advantage to turn some of our neighbors and friends into, greater friends. As protectorates, we would protect them and give them plenty of gifts of technology and resources over time. The feathery neighbors in the east ultimately were more friendly than the rocky boys to the west, but both of them eventually came to our side and became our very, very close protectorates. Eventually, we convinced them to join us even further in the embrace of friendship, and we actually let them contribute to the hive mind while we contributed to them by enlightening them intellectually. We plugged them into our network, and ultimately none of them complained, and they were all happy to be our very, very closely bound friends. This addition to the hive mind really helped us out as far as our power was concerned, and we started to become more and more strong as time went on. We couldn't research the Shroud directly, and in fact we had no way to ascend to reach into the Shroud. We had to find a different way. We kept chasing leads that were presented to us by our very intelligent empires to the north, but eventually we had a chance to truly confirm whether what they were saying was true. Extra dimensionals invaded the Imperium. They opened a portal and came in from a different dimension. Now, the Imperium immediately told us that these guys held the secret to our way back home, and if we could only just defeat them and stop their aggression, we could potentially all go home. Now, we didn't entirely believe that. The Imperium were the ones that dragged us out of the Shroud, so if anyone, they would know the way back. We wanted to make sure that their claims were genuine. We were starting to get a little suspicious of the Empire, and so we did something a little less friendly than usual. We sent in a spying operation in order to confirm what they were saying was genuine and not just an attempt to exploit us. The results were extremely concerning. Some in the Empire did genuinely believe that their rulers were trying to help us out and try to get us back into the Shroud. But a more sinister theory emerged. A lot of the higher echelons of society really wanted the Xumans gone. For good. They wanted to use this incursion of the Unbidden to destroy our fleets and to put down the great Xuman Overmind with no regard for our good intentions. We took out their portal, and ultimately nothing happened. A gateway didn't open for us to go back home. The Imperium was lying. The higher echelons of society were disappointed with our success, and ultimately that was the final straw in a string of deceptions perpetuated by the Empire. We asked them before if they knew anything about the Shroud, and they said nothing, even though their leaders were clearly psionic. We felt their psionic energies, and yet they were lying in our faces. And so we could not tolerate being in the galactic community, which was dominated by the Empire at this time. We could not stand the sight of them, and so we left. We were plenty rich in resources, and were very generous, but ultimately, some of the other empires were not so generous in being honest. right around this time, we adopted the slogan of friendship or death. Now, this wasn't meant to be threatening at all. It was a slogan to encourage others to become friends with us and not get on our bad side, because we were starting to really get ticked off with other empires in the galaxy, such as the Imperium or the Chocolat people, because those chocolatey boys, they promised us a lot but never gave us any results. All the information they seemed to give was false, just like the Imperiums, and ultimately we started viewing them as one and the same. Beings that would experience death instead of our friendship. Now, this did secure our bonds with our good neighbors, and friendship did entail lots and lots of resources, but it did seem to make other empires hostile to us for whatever reason. We did try to encourage them further by demonstrating the power of friendship. We came in and destroyed a fallen empire, but it only seemed to alienate the other empires, which was really strange. I really thought it encouraged them to be our friends, but they became our enemies and started to embrace death. Now, all things considered, right around this time, their embrace of death wasn't that bad for us. As we started to invade the fallen empire, we discovered that separating their bodies from their souls via a very, very painful process of dissection did give us insight into how we could potentially get back home to the Shroud. And considering their amount of population was pretty massive, we were able to get a lot of insight into a potential way to get to the Shroud. Some of our crazier scientists proposed building a massive star engine to take us back home via a massive release of energy throughout the galaxy. Initially, we thought that those ideas were crazy, but as we did more and more research, we discovered that that was the only way we could feasibly get back to the Shroud and get back home. And so we continued our research on other empires once the Fallen Empire was out of the question. Now, at this point, all we really needed was just a tiny bit more menace, as it was called, in order to complete research on the engine so that we can actually start constructing it and building a gateway back home. Unfortunately, the Empire had different plans. The Emperor, in his infinite stupidity, decided to stand in our way and try to protect an empire we were going to conduct research on. Now, he didn't have to do it, but he did. And so he came in our path. He wasn't a friend, and he was going to experience the other end of the slogan, death. The Empire attacked the research facilities we set up in the former Fallen Empire, attacked them and our troops directly. And we weren't going to allow that. It was extremely silly of them to believe they had any chance against the might of the Xuman Overmind, yet they struck us anyways. Well, those that did were simply disappeared. Now, they still had more forces in the field, and because they attacked us militarily, we weren't going to let those forces go. Once their fleets fled back to their capital, we jumped on top of them in order to ensure that there was nothing left for the Imperium to use against us, the friendly and kind Xuman Overmind. Yes, this sort of engagement is what aggressors get. Complete and utter annihilation. Fortunately for us, their meddling did not stand in the way of progress, and so we have started constructing the great Aetherophasic engine to take us back home. This did, however, prompt another empire to attack us directly. Now, this was entirely of their own volition, and as you can see, they jumped their entire forces through the L cluster and into our home territory. Ultimately, nothing could stand in the way of progress, and we were going to annihilate this invading force once and for all. What we did is we sent some fleets over from our home territory to the L cluster to make them retreat, and once all of their fleets went back to the L gate to try to retreat from the battlefield, we jumped all of our forces onto the black hole with the L-Gate in there. The engagement that happened afterwards was not pretty. Our forces engaged their forces, and their forces were completely and utterly wiped out. We took some losses. We took far more losses than we ever did taking the Imperium down, because the Imperium ultimately were weaker than this force, but this force did not stand a chance either. We could continue work on our engine and continue on working on a way to get back home. To construct the aetherphasic engine, we needed to obtain large quantities of matter. And this matter could only be found at the cores of stars. Dark matter in astounding quantities was to be obtained by blowing stars up and obtaining their juicy inside bits. Using our star crackers, which we have constructed in addition to those that we got at the very beginning of becoming the Crisis, we cracked stars throughout our home systems and eventually moved on to the systems of the enemy. The process went on exactly as we planned. There was only one potential for the Empire to set us back. Well, at this point, it wasn't just the Empire, it was the entirety of the galaxy united against us. The entirety of the galaxy except our friends. The caretaker robots to the east and the death cult to the west. They ultimately were on our side in this conflict, and so they wanted to help us out defending against the atrocious strikes of the Imperium. And once we went out to strike the invading enemy force, well, it was over by that point. The fleets engaged in a massive battle for the ages. It involved about half of our entire navy and the entire combined forces of the Imperium and its allies. The Imperium did use designs that could potentially counter our own ships. They used torpedo corvettes. However, by this point in the game, our neutron battleships reigned supreme. While torpedo corvettes are effective against our sorts of ships, the sheer amount of research that we put into them to boost their weapons ever so slightly, year after year, paid off. We annihilated the invading enemy force, and in exchange for a few of our own battleships, we wiped out the enemy and their will to fight for good. For this insolence, the Imperium was punished. We went into their systems, which we have avoided doing previously, and decided to dethrone them. We blew up the system which contained their interstellar assembly, and so they could no longer claim to be true rulers of the galaxy. The only assembly in the entirety of the galaxy was our very own in the Xuman Overmind. Symbolically, at this point, there was only one king in the galaxy. When the engine was nearing completion, we invited our friends, the Death Cult and the Caretakers, to come along with us to the Shroud, to ascend beyond the material plane, and to truly enjoy existence. And once the engine was constructed, we were finally able to go home. I'll let the previous me read out this glorious event. Everything is in place. The aetherphasic engine is now fully operational, and the vast power of the Shroud lies within our reach. When the engine is activated, the resulting subspace backlash will detonate every single star in the galaxy. All galactic life, be it organic or mechanical, will cease to exist, but by then, we will have safely transmitted our full consciousness to a higher plane of existence. Home. There, we will no longer be bound by the limitations of the physical world. Time will have no meaning, and the very fabric of the universe will be ours to manipulate as we deem necessary. I'm getting goosebumps. The next phase of the existence awaits. Shall we activate the engine?
Activate the
Fire it
engine.
Bring Douglas and Remy and them with us.
I think that's happening.
Rambling
Hi,
about
Remy.
it, yeah.
Love to see you. I'm glad you're here to see us press this button.
Yes, this button will take us back home and will take you with us. Let's go.
Thank you so much.
3, 2, 1, button.
Boom.
It's very quiet now.
The Imperium has collapsed. And so
Hey!
has the galaxy.
Yeah.
And the game is out of sync.
Good game, guys. Good game.
Good game.
That was amazing.
Oh, there we go.
Hopefully you enjoyed this recap. And as a reminder, the Nemesis DLC is available. There's a link in the description and the top comments, so please do go ahead and check that out. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.